Good morning, church.
Good morning.
If you haven't got the notes from today's lesson, because it's a little bit technical, nudge your neighbor. Every Christian has it, and they can send it to you quickly. So today, I'm glad if you've been invited. The title of today's lesson is Scientific Proof God is Real, and that He is the God of the Bible. Everybody today is besotted with science. You know, science proves that God doesn't exist. It's actually the complete opposite. So today we're going to use science to prove that God exists. Because we talk about it all the time. There are dinosaurs. How do you know that? You've seen one? No. But I can show you fossil records and all these facts, and therefore we believe dinosaurs lived. So we believe in enormous amounts using science and historical facts. Well, first let's discuss what is the difference in most people's hearts or mind between an atheist and a Christian. Most people actually don't really think this deeply, but when you think about it, what is? Well, both may believe in the Big Bang Theory. Both may believe that there was matter. Force was exerted on that matter and went bang, and it exploded. That matter grew into more matter that ended up creating the universe, Earth, and man. This was the beginning of what we call time. An atheist would acknowledge that there was time before time. In other words, before the Big Bang, there was something which wasn't time. And we just record time from the Big Bang. But then it went bang and we record time. Man records begin at the beginning of what we call the Big Bang. Genesis 1:1 says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. An atheist would go that, not in terms of believing. They'd go, it was created and it suddenly expanded. There is a force or an energy that makes things happen. Nobody can explain why. Why the original matter went bang, why the earth is held a certain distance from the sun or the moon, why Jupiter and Saturn are held in place. Nobody understands why. There's just a force that makes this happen. Why does an egg and a sperm get together and create another human being or an animal? Nobody knows why. Science just goes, this is what happens. But why? Why doesn't it create a chair? Well, that's not what happens. It's an egg and a sperm that create another animal. Science does not explain why. Science only explains how. The difference between an atheist and a Christian is as an atheist would call this force or gravity, and we would call it God. A Christian believes that this force or God is personal and wants a personal relationship with us. An atheist doesn't believe that this force is personal. He thinks that it's impersonal. You see, if a force is non-personal, like living with a robot, if you live with a robot, there's no relationship there. So if the robot is in a place that's inconvenient to you, you just move the robot. If you want to interact with the robot, you do. If you don't, you don't. And when it's impersonal, there is no accountability about that robot. You can use that robot however you want. However, if you live with a human being that has a personal relationship with you, there are now consequences for everything you do or do not do. Right. You see, with a robot, you can come home, be selfish, put the television on, the robot doesn't go, excuse me, what are you doing? But with a person, all of a sudden, there is accountability. It has an impact on what you do or what you do not want to do. And this is what human beings do not like. Human beings do not like accountability. You can't tell me what I'm doing is wrong or what I'm not doing is wrong or is right. That's the bit we don't like. Therefore, it is so much easier just not to believe that there is not a God. However, believing there is not a God does not change God's existence.
Right. Come on.
This is a true statement. Either God exists or He doesn't.
Right.
Whether you believe He exists or not is totally irrelevant to the fact of whether He exists or whether He does not exist. Yeah. But sometimes we go like little children, don't we? You ever play hide and seek with a child? Rather than actually going into another room and hiding, they just put their hands in front of them and they just go, I'm hiding, and you're right there in front of them. But to them it's like, well, I can't see you, therefore you don't exist. That is literally how we like to treat God. We go, well, I just don't want to think about him, therefore he doesn't exist. That is not a scientific way of proving or disproving God. Right. There's no science in that logic whatsoever. Christians do not believe that God is an impersonal being. We believe he's a personal being and wants a relationship with him. So how can you prove that God exists in a scientific way? Well, the simplest way that people have been believing for thousands of years, whether you think this is ignorance or not, is actually prayer. This is not what I'm going to use, I'm just going to refer to it. See, when you pray for something specifically, and it happens, I mean really specifically. So, in my life, Kerry and I, well particularly myself at the beginning, prayed for twins. There are no twins in any of our family. And we prayed, and we were given twins, a boy and a girl. You go, well, that was just fluke. Okay, I get that, once or twice. But when you pray specifically again and again, and things specifically happen, you have to make two conclusions. Either there is a force or a God that is answering your prayers, or you have just become a magician. They are the only two answers. And for most people, that is how God proved. But you see, we in our wonderful knowledge and all our university degrees and all of our science, we go, that's for the simple people. Well, okay, so let's get a little bit more complex. If God wanted to prove to us, thousands of years later, knowing that we would have computers and science and all these different sort of equipment, and God is infinitely knowledge and outside time, he goes, okay, I know this is coming, so I'm going to do things to set the platform to prove it to you. So, how could God have communicated to man and us not be able to disprove that it was from him? You think about this. So God's there and going, I know how cynical man is. I want to tell him exactly how to live his life and how to protect his life and how to build a loving relationship. I know what? I'll write it on a wall. Well, if he did that, we go, you know, the Egyptians wrote it on the wall. All right, how else could I do it? Well, I could speak to man directly. What's the problem with that? Well, if I generally speak to Sean and say, Sean, you need to go and tell Pete to give you $100. Well, Pete could lie and go, I don't believe you. Actually, God told me you need to give me $200 because we have the ability to lie. If he wrote it in a book and threw it out of the sky, we'd go, you know what, 4,000 years ago, somebody wrote a book, put it on a balloon, there must have been some magic to it, or catapult. And in other words, we're so cynical, we think we can come up with every single answer. So point number one, he uses the Bible. You go, well, that's the Christian book. Well, actually, we're going to take a look at this book in a scientific way. The Bible does not have a single contradiction in it, which is impossible if it was written just by man. So if the Bible's either written by man or written by God. That's its author. They're the only two options. So in 2 Peter chapter 1 verse 20, this is what the Bible teaches us about itself or claims about itself. In 2 Peter chapter 1 verse 20 it says, above all, you must understand that no prophecy of Scripture came about by the prophet's own interpretation. For prophecy never had its origin in the will of man, but men spoke from God as they were carried along by the Holy Spirit. So what God is going to do here is he's going to use man's weakness, which is his lack of ability to actually be unified, to prove that it cannot be written by man, but it's written by God. Here it's actually claiming this. It's claiming that the actual people that wrote the Bible, they were like instruments used by God, by the Holy Spirit. So if I write you a letter, the words on the paper are actually mine, but my finger doesn't put them on the paper, it's the pen. And if I use an acrylic pen or a red pen or a blue pen, it looks different. And if I use my left or right hand, it looks different, but they're my words. You don't go, well, look, they're the pen's words. That's ridiculous. In the same way, because God who is spirit, is communicating it with us in a physical world, he uses his spirit goes into man, And he uses that man to write, and depending on whether the man comes from a background, whether a doctor or whether a lawyer, it has different influences on that. So the book of Luke was written by the doctor Luke, so it has a lot of the medical accounts of Jesus' death. Go, well, that's just rubbish. Lots of books claim that. I mean, Buddha said he was enlightened. Yeah, but here's the problem. Nobody, except for Buddha, can prove it. So Buddha woke up and said, I am enlightened, and you need to believe me. But if I came to you today and go, okay, guys, everything written before me is rubbish. I, Joe, have been visited by God. Thank you for coming today. You need to listen to me. I am the new enlightened one. Would any of you stay for coffee? I don't think so. Even Muhammad, here's the problem with the Quran. The Quran was Muhammad reading it, people writing it down. So if Muhammad is wrong, the whole of the Quran is wrong. And what proof is there that Muhammad met the angel Gabriel? There is none. And that is what people are cynical about, is that, well, hold on, man just wants to manipulate people through religion. And has that happened for thousands of years? Absolutely. Why? Because man is evil and man is selfish. So where is the Bible different? Well, this is where God, and I do think God has an incredible sense of humor, because I think he looks at our wisdom and our intelligence and laughs. A little bit like a 1-year-old coming up and going to daddy, go, I know everything about electricity, let me fix it, Dad. And you're like, really? I don't think so. God takes a book, actually 66 books, and the Bible has one consistent theme: the existence of, the impact of, and then prophesying about Jesus coming. So the theme throughout the whole Bible is actually Jesus the Messiah. That's its central theme all the way through. It is 66 different books, written by 40 different authors, in 3 different languages, over a period of 1,500 years, most of whom did not ever meet each other. Some were written simultaneously in different countries, and no, there wasn't internet to see if they were writing exactly the same thing. And God is going, is it possible to bring 66 books by 40 different authors and for there to be no contradiction in them? Is that possible? No, it's not. It's not possible for there to be no contradiction. Why? Because man loves to argue. Man loves to disagree. I'll give you a simple example. If I came to your office or your university tomorrow and I said, who wants $1 million within the next hour? And we'll go, yeah, I'm honestly, all you got to do is one simple thing. All right, all of you sit and watch for an hour and I'm going to make a meal, a spaghetti bolognese or something. Everybody watch. And then at the end of the hour, I give you each a piece of A4 and I said, everybody, right now, write down exactly what I did in exactly the right order. And if there are no contradictions amongst all 40 of you, I will give you each $1 million. Is that possible? No, because man cannot agree. They absolutely cannot agree. And that's with no time difference in the same room. And everybody seeing exactly, and a pure motive. Everybody wants $1 million. Now you're talking about 40 different authors with so many complicated variances. In Psalm 18, the Bible claims about itself in verse 30 that it is flawless. In Psalm 19:7 it says, the Lord is perfect. In other words, the Bible claims about itself there is no contradiction. So if there is a contradiction in it, then you can't trust the Bible. In actual fact, the only reason we believe there's a heaven and a hell is because all the rest of the Bible is provable. That bit isn't. But because we know the character of the Bible to be true, we go, if the Bible says there's a heaven and a hell, there's a heaven and a hell. Just like if you knew me all my life and you knew I never ever lied, and then I said I had a red bike when I was 3 years old, you go, well, I presume he did because he never lies. And that's why we believe it. Well, how is that scientific proof? Well, how do you come up with proof as a scientist? You do an experiment. You go, okay, if I put A with B and A equals C once, that might be true. Then you put A with B again and it equals C, and you go, okay, twice. A plus B equals C 3 times. And you do it multiple times and you go, okay, we agree that A and B equals C. Okay, exactly the same. You take the first 5 books written by Moses, and you're okay, that's one author. Yeah, you expect them to agree. Then you get another author and you compare them and go, well, there's no contradictions in here. So either they knew each other and they were best friends, or maybe they had the same source or the same author. Well, then you take another set of books written by another author and you go, okay, here are 3 things, and there's no contradiction in them. So they were obviously using the same source, so they were written by the same person. Then you do another experiment, you add another book, and you do that 39 times. And you find they must have all come from the same source because there is no contradiction. That is how you conduct a scientific experiment. And what we see is, if there is no contradictions, they must come all from the same source, especially when you look at exactly what they're talking about. So the Bible is not a scientific book, it's a relationship book. However, when it deals with science, it is absolutely perfect. Point number 2.
Come on.
It has supernatural knowledge. Well, it's supernatural to us humans, but it's not supernatural to God. You suddenly find out there's a new planet at the end of a telescope and you go, whoa, new knowledge. And God goes, old knowledge. All right, while the book is a relationship book, hence why it only takes 3 chapters to deal with the creation of the world. Why? On a day-to-day basis, whether the world was created in a day, 24 hours, or 1,000,000 years does not affect your marriage. And everybody walks around thinking about their relationships. They don't walk around thinking about how is the composite of that brick over there. In other words, it's a relationship book. Although it deals with that, it is full of scientific facts. So if you were writing a book 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, you would expect that now with our knowledge, we would go, well, some of the things you wrote about would be wrong because our knowledge has caught up. But actually, when it comes to the Bible, there are no scientific facts that have disproved the Bible. In actual fact, what we realize is that man's knowledge is catching up with God's knowledge. That's very, very different. So we have to ask ourselves, where did the writers get some of this knowledge from? So understand this, and there's a whole lot of lists down here. I'll go through some. In the Bible, the oldest book is most probably Job. It's not Genesis. So Job is about 4,000 years old. Job 26:7 says, he spreads out the northern skies over empty space. He suspends the earth over nothing. So that one fact doesn't prove God, but it's claiming that basically here is the earth and it's held up by nothing. You go, well, we know that. Neil Armstrong went out in the moon, looked back, and there we are, suspended above nothing. And yet that is a very new belief. Only about 400 years ago. In actual fact, the Catholic Church nearly killed Christopher Columbus for saying that the world was round. They said he'd drop off the end of it. Hindu religion believes it's on top of an elephant, on top of a turtle, and it's flat. So this is where we see, well, we all know this one, but for thousands of years, this is not what people believed. I think the Bible, even right at the beginning, when it talks about building Noah's Ark, in Genesis 6:15, the exact measurements that it uses for building the ark are the ideal dimensions for a ship's stability. Completely, you can use that at any point in time for any large vessel today, and it still works. That wouldn't be something, if it was a myth, that you would go, that would be true. I think about creation is made of particles. That's a really new thing that we have understood. But in Hebrews, it's made of particles that are unseen with our own eyes. Hebrews 11:3 says, by faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. This discovery was only made in the 19th century, that actually physical things were made out of things that we cannot see. See, I'm boring you with science now, aren't I? I think about dealing with diseases. This is one of the greatest things for me, because obviously we want to live longer, we want to have a healthy life. But actually, if you built a hospital just using the principles of the Bible up until 150 years ago, it would be more hygienic than any hospital man had created up to that time. One of the most simple things is that in dealing with disease, clothes and the body should be washed with running water. Leviticus 15:13. Again, that book is nearly 4,000 years old. For centuries, people naively washed their clothes in standing water. They'd get a bowl or a basin and they'd do that. And it kept the disease in the actual garments. I think about in Deuteronomy 23, and these are the first 5 books, some 3,500 years ago, God commanded to actually go outside of the camp where everybody lived, dig a hole, and go to the latrine there, do their business there, and have it outside the camp. Up until 100 years ago, armies did not do that. In the First World War, more people died because they actually did all their business inside their camp or inside their trench, and as a result, disease went through the people. More people died from disease than actually guns and cannons in the First World War. In actual fact, it was the turning point of the Second World War, where Rommel in North Africa, who was much better at beating the English actually did have their toilets in latrines, and the Germans didn't because they were on the run. As a result, they got dysentery. Rommel got dysentery, went away, and that was the turning point of the war. If he'd only read his Bible, life would have been very different. Why would you write these things? Except for it's a personal God going, I want to protect you. Now, one of my cousins is a top university at professor at Keele University, and he said, Joe, I know where Moses got all this information from. He was a prince in Egypt, and he would have known a lot of the modern medical things, and he would have written those in the Bible. Okay, but you would have thought he would have also put some stuff that the Egyptians did in there that didn't work. Like one of the most common ones is bleeding. For thousands of years, people go, illness is in the blood, so if you cut the wrist and you let blood come out, that will get illness out. And that's about the worst thing you can do. It makes you weak. So you would expect the Bible to be full of things that the Egyptians thought were right, and some that were right, and some that weren't wrong. There is not a medical thing in the Bible that we are told to do that is actually bad for your health. Wow. I think in Job, again, the oldest book, 38:16, it says, have you journeyed to the springs of the sea, or walked on the recesses of the depth? We now know that at the bottom of the ocean, there are springs. So basically what people had always thought is that the way that the sea fills up is basically rain, either from the clouds or rain that goes on the land, and the water comes into the sea. And yet here, we see in the oldest book, God says there are actually freshwater streams that come up underneath the ocean and feed the ocean from that way. How do they know that? Down at the bottom of the sea, you are under 6,000 pounds per square inch pressure. No human being could ever get down there. Only by us sending special robots, etc., do we now know that. So the Bible is littered with all this scientific information, and you have to make a decision. Either the Bible was written by a man and men, and they were just incredibly lucky with all these scientific facts, or actually an all-knowing God was the person that wrote the Bible. And when we discuss a scientific argument, you go, well, if there's this fact, and this fact, and this fact, and this fact, and this fact, how can you then say that's not true? You can't say that because that's unscientific. It's the same with the Bible. If it's full of all these scientific pieces of information that are thousands of years old, and not one of them is wrong, as opposed to the Quran, as opposed to the Bhagavad Gita, as opposed to Buddha's writings that we actually don't know what he wrote down because it wasn't written down until the first year of Jesus speaking in AD 29. So nobody really knows what Buddha said. And he doesn't deal with creation at all. So the Bible is the only one that really addresses things and is brave enough, because it is the truth. Let's talk about science. If you get the notes, there's a little link there of 101 scientific facts, because actually science bores people. You ever found that? All right? We're not really that interested in science. I've got a couple of nods like this. Some people do. For most people, and I think that's where we go wrong a lot of the time. Actually, most people aren't interested in the truth, and they're not interested in the facts about anything. Yes. That's the truth. Most people would prefer to eat junk food than really understand what's on the label. Yeah. How many of us go into the supermarket and read the label? A very few people. Yeah. And that's really who we're dealing with. Okay, third one. The Bible is the only religious book with prophecies in it. So prophecies, or knowing the future, is impossible, right? If you knew, like, have you ever seen Back to the Future? Okay, and he finds a book of who wins all these races, and then he goes back and he bets on them and he becomes rich. So if anybody really knew the future, they'd be very rich, right? Because they'd just go, well, this horse is going to win, and this horse is going to win, and this horse is going to win. But that's not possible. It's not possible to know the future. Why? Because we are inside time. However, God is not inside time. So people go, well, who created God? You've asked the wrong question. God is outside time. So God existed before the Big Bang, and time began at the Big Bang. So now we know, even from a scientific point of view, that there is time outside time. And science knows that the universe is expanding and will retract and cease to exist. So if the universe ceases to exist, well, then there is time outside time. Eternity. So there are things that do not need creating, i.e. God. Titus 1 verse 2 says, in the hope of eternal life, which God, who does not lie, promised before the beginning of time. God was before time. Jude 1:21, keep yourselves in God's love as you wait for the mercy of our Lord Jesus Christ to bring to you eternal life. So as Christians, we actually look forward to death. We can be chilled out. I can't wait to get to the point where I know I'm going to live forever. Whereas actually, as a Christian, there's still a bit of insecurity of, will I make it? Will I stay faithful? But actually, we're like, kill me, make my day. I mean, I'm looking forward to it. And it actually proves whether you really believe it or not, doesn't it? Yeah. But we shouldn't be worried. So how can God give us prophecy? Well, if it's outside time, it's really actually easy. We're inside time, so we look at things linear. We go, okay, what's going to happen tomorrow? What's going to happen from behind? So we don't know. But if you just take a step back, so bear with me. There's a microphone here and a microphone there. If this is the beginning of time, and that is the end of time, and I am the middle of time, we see things this way. So we can't know what's in the future. However, if I just take a step back and I take myself outside of time, I can actually see with my vision what happens there exactly the same time as what happens there. Now, all I need to do, if I can transfer that information over there, then that's prophecy. It's really, really simple. That's it. God goes, well, I see every moment inside time at exactly the same moment. So God doesn't prophesy to make it happen. So he did not make Judas betray Jesus. Because he's outside time, he just goes, I'm going to let you know that's what's going to happen. And what's really, really dumb for us is God will tell us exactly what's going to happen and we'll still go ahead and do it anyway. A bit like your parents. If you do that, this is going to happen. No, it's not. Okay, drive the car back. Oh, sorry, Dad. I mean, that's literally how it could be happening. I know it's a little bit funny, but we are like that as human beings. I want to damage the car and prove it that I'm not going to do it, and then we crash it. Some of my favorite prophecies, and this is one, again, there's a lot of notes in the email, but one of my favorite ones is in Daniel. So I'm European, and I like European history. And this is about Alexander the Great. There are far more impressive ones, but in Daniel 11, verse 1, it says that the first year of Darius the Mede. So in other words, Darius was king of the Medo-Persian Empire. So he's going, this is the date. We know that for sure. I took my stand to support and protect him. This is Angel Gabriel. He's talking to Daniel. He says, now then, I tell you the truth. 3 more kings will appear in Persia, then a 4th, who will be far richer than all the others. When he has gained power by his wealth, he will stir up every one against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king will appear, who will rule with great power and do as he pleases. After he has appeared, his empire will be broken up and parceled out to the 4 winds of heaven. It will not go to his descendants, nor will it have the power he exercised, because his empire will be uprooted and given to others. It's not the most impressive, but it's my favorite, and as I'm the preacher, I can pick it. Yeah. So basically what happens is, the Medo-Persian is enormous. He's talking about the Greek Empire, Alexander the Great. But when this is written, Philip of Macedonia, who's like a hill tribe leader, hasn't conquered Greece and unified them. And Alexander the Great hasn't been born. So it's literally like this. The Medo-Persian Empire was the largest empire in the world at its time. In comparison, because Alexander the Great, when he attacked the Persians, only arrived with 10,000 soldiers. So he then went against the first battle and he defeated, at negative amount, 250,000 people. 10,000 beat 250,000. Most people believe it was 2 million, but let's just keep it scientific and bare minimums. 10,000 people beat 250,000 people. That's the equivalent of me saying Guatemala, after 3 more presidents, and then one's going to come who's got loads of money, a bit like Trump, okay, get a lot of money, got into power. Guatemala is then going to revolt, take over the whole of America, and then the person who takes it over, it's not going to go to his descendants. We're going to split up America into 4 pieces, and it's going to go to people that's not his descendants. And we know that Alexander the Great, after he died, his empire was split to his 4 generals, and it didn't go to his son. Where do you get that sort of information? That's crazy. Well, that's like saying Nepal will suddenly become really powerful, take over the whole of China and split China into 4. And that's pretty incredible. So is that the most impressive? No, it's not the most impressive. It's just my favorite. Okay. The most impressive really are about Jesus, because guess what? The Bible's all about Jesus. Yeah. There are meant to be 400 prophecies about Jesus. Where he would be born in the house of David, in other words, he had specific ancestors, born in Bethlehem, would start his ministry in Galilee. Why is that weird? Well, Galilee's North Israel, and I've just been there with Kerry, and it's like little fishing villages, and Jerusalem, the main city, you'd think if you're going to start a movement, it's going to be in Jerusalem. He goes, no, he's going to come out of the countryside. He'd be betrayed by a friend, would be sold for 30 pieces, would be crucified, would be pierced on the side when he's crucified. So, again, some of these prophecies for Jesus to fulfill, even if he knew them, what was he doing? Is he hanging on the cross, dying, is beaten, is being flogged? He's going, excuse me, soldier, can you just sort of stab me in the side here? Got another prophecy to fulfill. I mean, it doesn't work like that. And so why is this scientific? Well, this is one of the things that we use for proving that Jesus was the Messiah, especially in the early church they did. They go, why should we believe in Jesus? Okay, let's get out the Old Testament. You guys believe in the Old Testament, the Jews? Yeah, we believe in the Old Testament. We're waiting for the Messiah. Well, he's here and he's gone and you've just killed him. No, we haven't. We're still waiting for him. All right, let's go back and see exactly what the Messiah was meant to be like. This is where he was born. Okay, Jesus was born in the right place. Okay, he preached in Galilee. Okay, he fulfilled that one. He did this, he did, and he died a crucifixion. When the scriptures about crucifixion were written, crucifixion was not even invented as a way of torture. And so what is science is going, here's a fact, here's a fact, here's a fact, here's a fact. I've looked at the prophecies. Some of them, again, I don't speak Hebrew or Greek, so some of them I sort of think, well, maybe I've got to understand the Hebrew to really understand it. And that's why I go, okay, 400. There are at least 100 that are plain as can be. Born, born, came out of Galilee, born of a virgin, not a likely sort of prophecy that you would use. Was crucified with thieves, etc., etc. So that's another scientific proof that we have to look at. Well, you go, well, maybe the Christians rewrote the Old Testament after Jesus existed. That's how you deal with prophecy. Well, the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were found in 1946 to 1956, have every book of the Bible in the Old Testament, and they, except for Nehemiah and Esther, most probably because they were joined in one book originally, and Esther doesn't have the word God, and so this sort of little sect of Jews were like, I don't want to read that book. But it has the complete Old Testament that predates Jesus. So scientifically, we've got evidence before the event. That's like having a dinosaur here, a real dinosaur, to prove that they existed from fossils. That would literally be the equivalent. Guys, these fossils are true from a dinosaur, and I can prove it right now because here's a dinosaur. No one would argue whether there's dinosaurs then, right? You go and touch, go, okay, this is it. So you go to the Dead Sea Scrolls and you go, these were written about how Jesus was going to live and die. These are actually older than Jesus. He then did it. Okay, he must be the Messiah. And even just from one scroll, which is Isaiah, and it's the one that's most publicly displayed in the museum at Jerusalem, I've got a whole load of prophecies just from that here. So, science, God. Actually, all science is man's way of explaining what he wants to understand. That's all it is. Actually, the first scientists, or many of the first scientists, were looking into science to prove God. And yet man, as with everything, has distorted it. So, the Bible does not have a single contradiction in it, which is impossible if it's written by man. Yeah. Yes, we use the Bible to prove God. Just like you'd use a dinosaur fossil to prove there are dinosaurs. You can't go, well, I don't want to use the Bible. That's like saying, I don't want to use a dinosaur fossil to prove this dinosaur. The Bible's about God. Secondly, it has supernatural knowledge. So, how do we explain that the Bible or these people have all this supernatural knowledge if there is no God behind their writing it? Not only that, how do we explain prophecy? So when we present a scientific experiment to prove something, we go, here are the facts, here are the facts, here are the facts. Now you need to make a decision. I don't know anybody that has seen a real dinosaur. But we all believe in it because we can go to the fossils and go, look, here is proof. I don't know anybody that met Julius Caesar. And yet there is so much written about Julius Caesar, actually a lot less than was written about Jesus. And we go to Rome and go, okay, Julius Caesar must have existed. There is more proof for God and Jesus existing than any of those people. These facts demand a decision. So it's a little bit like you go back, you're living with a robot. Then the robot wakes up one day and is turned into a human being and goes, I know everything about your life and everything you've done because I've been here the whole time. You're like, oh my goodness me. That's literally what it's like. You can choose to ignore it. You could move house and go, I'm not living with a crazy robot that suddenly becomes a human being. I mean, that is one option. But these facts demand a decision. Nobody can make any other person become a Christian. There are two issues in Christianity. Is it true, and do you want to do it? Yeah. What we are meant to be as Christians is be expert people at proving to you that God is existing. We cannot, nor would we want to, make you do it. Because the great joy of this church is everybody wants to be here. Yeah. Yeah. Everybody wants to sing. You get it? Like everybody wants to sing. You go, wow, man, these guys really sing. Yeah, because we want to be here. Come on. God does not want to force anybody to love him that does not want to. That's like being in an arranged marriage where you just hate the person. However, God does love you and wants an intimate relationship with you. There is a God. The Bible is his word, which means God and his word are correct and everything in it. We just need to reason that through in our own hearts. And we all go through that. We're not preaching from a self-righteous point of view. The Bible's hard to accept. The truth is hard to accept. None of us disagree with that. But as friends, we can get our heart around it. When God says something is wrong to do, it's wrong. When God says something is right to do, it's right. It doesn't matter if your whole country, 1 billion people, 2 billion people, don't believe it's right. The majority rarely means it's true in life. The only question today is, what are you going to do with this information? You can get the notes from anybody. This will be on YouTube tonight. There is a God. The Bible is his word. And it's time to change. My recommendation to you is sit down with the person that brings you and go, can we get into this? Can we study the Bible a bit? I've got a lot of questions. It took me 2.5 months to get all my questions answered. And I had a lot. That's fine. It really doesn't matter whether it takes you a week, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months. The issue is you must die saved. Yeah. And to God be the glory. Amen.